That's a little weird.
All right, gents. We're talking about diaspora. So, Group 1. How did Muslim merchant communities introduce their own traditions in the Indian Ocean region?
So warfare and expansion, trade, taxes if you weren't, or lower taxes if you converted. The religion was open to everyone in public prayer, which...
Okay, Muslim merchant communities in the Indian Ocean region. So we're talking about groups that weren't part of the major religion. So the opposite. Okay, you got it. Just need to flip it. We'll come back to you. Let's go Group 2. How did Chinese merchant communities introduce their own traditions in Southeast Asia?
In Vietnam, their culture borrowed heavily from China by adopting Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism as administrative techniques.
What about how they had their own sort of indigenous cultures and blended it with traditional culture, or the hegemonic culture, if you will? That's true.
They developed a variation of Chinese writing called Qunong.
Good.
But they still kept some distinctive features of their culture.
Like what?
Like a greater role of women in social and economic life.
Good. So that's a good answer. You see how they said they basically borrowed from Chinese from the local culture and sort of modified it to fit their own sort of Chinese cultural beliefs. Okay, so that's a really good answer right there. Nice job, guys. So Group 3. How did Jewish communities in the Mediterranean, Indian Ocean, or on the Silk Roads introduce their own traditions to indigenous cultures? Yeah, let's start with Christian.
Some of the smaller tribes would have relationships with Indian leaders.
Good. So, hang on. How is that introducing their own traditions, though?
Oh, but they would be able to release or whatever their traditions since they were pals or whatever with.
Okay, so they necessarily wouldn't be persecuted because they had a relationship. Okay, that's good. Anthony?
So what they would do is like they weren't only just trading in a specific region like their merchants. And the reason for that is what happened was there were a lot of exiles in Jewish history, and so as they would move to a different place, their merchants would like start trading with new people, which spread it like even further.
Totally. So I'm going to telegraph a question here, and then we'll get to you, Luke. You hit on it right there, Anthony. Why do we see? So when we're talking about Muslim merchant communities, we're talking about the Indian Ocean region, right? Chinese.
Yeah, exactly. You have three different.
Why do you see it so much vary geography with Jewish diaspora compared to the other two?
Well, because as they when they were. So they sort of started in a specific region, and through their exiles, they went to new regions, and so they were able to eventually, because they were exiled all these times, they were able to eventually spread to all those regions. Whereas, China would only be focused in a certain area because that's the only place that it originated.
So let's two things here. One, Anthony's right, and you see the Jewish diaspora happening in diverse geographic regions, frankly, because they've been exiled for longer, right? Also, what's significant about sort of the Jewish diasporic communities and sort of the reason for their exodus versus the other two?
You mean why they were exiled?
Or why they were in a different culture. So these Muslim communities in the Indian Ocean, were they exiled from the Islamic Empire? No, what were they doing?
They were part of the trade.
They were trading, yeah. So they were leaving the Islamic Empire, and they were kind of forming their own sort of traditions and indigenous cultures because they were trading. Same thing with the Chinese merchant communities in Southeast Asia. What do we see with the Jewish communities? They leave the Holy Land because they wanted to trade? No, they were kicked out. Good. And I like that analysis saying there are people that's always been in exile, so you see them over a geographically diverse region. Luke, did you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to say that they were valued by the Byzantines because they weren't subject to the same rules as merchants that Christians were.
Okay,
So,
interesting. Do you have an example of that?
Pope, over a period of time, he wouldn't allow Christian lenders or loaners to charge interest on loans
Because it was anti-biblical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the Jews weren't subject to the same laws, so they were seen as valuable.
Good. So essentially, Jews could make more money via interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. Great point. All right, my first group. So how did Muslim merchant communities sort of establish their own traditions in indigenous cultures such as the Indian Ocean?
Oh, will I be going top? Okay.
Go for it.
Well, with the trade,
Mm-hmm.
the Indian Ocean, they got the widespread ideas from Swahili countries in Africa,
Okay.
India and China,
Okay.
which kind of melded together to create different ideas as a melting pot, and along with the Islamic ideas from Muhammad, they were able to gain wealth in items from Muslim, which increased their capability for trade.
Good. So I think the best example we can see is obviously the spread of Islam happened over a large part of sort of this, as the empire went further east, obviously using some of these Indian Ocean trading routes, right? So the spread of Islam itself is sort of this idea of creating sort of an indigenous or a practice. Being like, obviously Muslim merchants are going to be practitioners of Islam, right? And so they're going to continue that practice with them even as they're trading in the Indian Ocean region. So the spread of Islam itself could be an example for that. All right. So does everybody understand what we're talking about here? So it's like these merchants leaving. Remember, trade routes are long. They'd often spend years of their lives on these trade routes. So obviously they're going to try to keep some element of home with them as they go along. But we see through these examples in the Jewish communities and the Chinese communities specifically how they take their cultural values and sort of their ideals with them, and oftentimes those blend with the local cultures and form something different or new. Okay? And that all goes back to answer the original question, showing how these cross-cultural exchanges were intensified by networks of